2020 amendment budget, which I have just signed into law today, underscores our administration's firm commitment to effectively contain the spread of COVID-19 and protect the lives and livelihood of our people. With these budget amendments, as well as our recently launched 2.3 trillion naira stimulus program, we are well positioned to safeguard the economy. Considering recent budget implementation challenges, I have directed that efforts be made to assure effective implementation of the Appropriation Repeal and Amendment Act 2020 in order to realize its laudable objectives. The Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning is in the process of effecting budgetary releases that will ensure that all ministries, departments, and agencies receive at least 50% of their amended capital budget by the end of this month. The Appropriation Repeal and Amendment Act 2020 that I have just signed into law provides for aggregate expenditures of 10.81 trillion naira, which is an increase of 216 billion naira over the level of expenditure initially proposed in 2020 Appropriation Act.
Jobs, employment problems or unemployment problems, rising unemployment figures, threatening poverty, state challenged economy, need for across all levels, and many other issues on the front burner. And then we have COVID-19, which has made it a lot worse. And then we have a revised budget, among so many other things. And of course, you just listened to the president. Where do all these issues leave us, given the impact of COVID-19 and in consideration of the fact that the revised budget has been signed? Well, we have a couple of gentlemen who will be joining us, but let's begin with Ogbonna Okuku, who is a business and investment consultant. He joins us from our studio in Abuja. Thanks for joining us this morning. The issues are there. There's a plethora of issues, definitely giving so many people concern. How concerned are you about the economy in the light of COVID-19?
Everybody will be concerned. Every watchers of the economy and the managers of the economy must be concerned at this time, because COVID has affected almost everything, whether it's the economy, whether it's the transport system, whether it's construction work, whether it's the agri sector. Every sector have had a hit from the COVID-19 and its effects. But I mean, anyhow you want to look at it, the cushions, the things that need to come in to help support some of the businesses are things that we are all looking at, the focus now for the government, and then every other, even the private sector, what are the things that everybody needs to, bring on board to see how we can, grow the economy or get, businesses back on their feet. So pretty much it's a big blow on all the global economy. Nigeria not left out of it. So the blow is also here. We're feeling the impact, and then every single person is feeling the impact.
Also joining us this morning is Obadiah Melafia. He's an economist, and he would also want to lend his voice. Thank you for joining us this morning as well. Well, you have heard Mr. Okuku express his own the fact that everyone would be concerned. Talking a little more specifically now, which area of the economy do you think we must do something about, otherwise we are in serious trouble?
Well, actually, the productive sector, this is really what I think is critical. Human capital is extremely important. health, social welfare, human development, education. They're all important. But for now, what we really need is to reboot the productive sector. Because, the lockdown has reached a level where for many manufacturers, having virtually slowed down or closed down, restarting would require a lot of work. And particularly in the infrastructure area, because this is really where the concept of public works will be very critical. And that is to be able to get a lot of our young people back to work. And I'm hoping that, our decision makers will have enough wisdom to focus on getting particularly young people back to work using public works approaches to infrastructure development, rural development. I know there's been this 774 local government jobs scheme. And I'm very concerned that there's been bickering over it to and fro between the legislature and the ministries. I think we need to avoid that so that there is a comprehensive approach and a win-win positive sum approach that will get a lot of people back to work. This is critical to restoring confidence, to rebooting aggregate demand, and to get the great Nigerian people back to work and to restore confidence. This is fundamental. We need to get it right so that we can avoid what looks like an unprecedented recession. And listening to Mr. President, I feel encouraged. I think this is a positive step. They've shown enough concern, and what is important is that the marching orders are given so that those at the implementation end will do what they must do. And it cannot be business as usual, because we live in extraordinary times in which it's not only just the numbers, but the social psychology. The people are in a state of shock because of the virtual paralysis in the economy and in our international system.
Yeah, just one moment. Well, what you have said is quite valid, and many people are definitely concerned. And I just as Mr. Okuku said earlier, but if we are to pay a little more attention to what you have just said now, on the one hand is what the president has said. That is what the government is going to do or is planning to do. And you have also talked about the constraints of the words being matched with action. How quickly do you think we can get to that? I'll bring in the private sector end later, and the impact on the people which you are talking about. But how close are we, or far are we from what the president said to actions being taken on what the president said?
Well, like I said, I'm just hoping it is not business as usual, because the bureaucracy has been a binding constraint, even in the best of times. So in these extraordinary circumstances in which we live, there could be tendencies for slippages. So I'm just hoping that somehow, the people in charge will be more rigorous in ensuring that all these good policies, and they're good policies, will take off the ground very quickly. And there should be more rigorous monitoring. This is a big responsibility for Ministry of Finance, Planning and Budget, and of course the Office of the Secretary to the government, and also my teacher and mentor, Professor Ibrahim Gambari, the Chief of Staff, to really ensure that there's a rigorous monitoring and enforcement of implementation, and to get all the people involved to understand that it cannot be business as usual, and that we need to move with speed to get things done, particularly in the capital capital allocation, where Mr. President has shown very strong commitment, and I think this is wisdom, that by end of this month, at least they will get at least 50% of their capital expenditure. This is really a record. We haven't ever attained that level in the last 5 years, in the last 10 years, in fact. So I think these are positive developments.
Okay.
We need to build on that to restore confidence among our people.
Let me take this to Mr. Okuku now. You've heard Dr. Melafia, and the natural concern anyone would have is, he talked about speed, about the government acting expeditiously to jumpstart the economy. Are you hopeful that speed?
Beyond being hopeful, I also expect, certain, actions to follow, what the president has just said. Now, there has to be, strict monitoring, of some of these projects. Everybody concerned must be serious about paying attention to details. We all know that we're in very serious times. So that means there'll be no room for lapses. There shouldn't be rooms for excuses. Then again, those within the bureaucracy must be given targets. Each and every one of them, no matter the agency where you operate from, everybody must have a target, and there has to be an audit on our workforce, so that quickly, if it's going to be manned from the SGF's office or from the head of service, those in offices must have the right skill and have the ability to deliver on whatever you're going to pass down to them. There's something that exists in Ministry of Finance called the efficiency unit. I think that should go around the entire ministries. If it's Servicom structure that they want to use, but we know that at this point in time, we should not have any excuses at all. Anyone given a job must do that job, and within a specific time, given to them to deliver on that job. So until we begin to place demand on our workforce, we can't be getting, the adequate results that we expect. Don't forget about, I think there are about 400,000 of them working within our workforce. So our income, our revenue as a nation, our location as a nation is servicing, that's about less than 2% of the entire nation. So if we're sacrificing so much for the workforce needs to also give us commensurate result from whatever monies are being pushed into their salaries, gratuities, and pensions, when they have left work. So these are things, I know that those managing the economy should focus on and make sure that they all happen, so that we can see faster results.
Mr. Okuku, on the one hand are the people who give the instructions, on the other hand are the people who get the job done, and to them money is released. The Auditor General over the years has always indicted one agency of government or another of either not performing or not delivering or not declaring resources that have been given to them, and the Auditor General has continually asked for reports to be made. So far, nothing has been done about that. That report is there to, as you want to say, fight corruption, and that should be like a trace, a pattern through which we can judge which agency has been up to par and which agency hasn't been up to par over the years. These agencies are needed to do their job so that the private sector can do their own jobs as and when due. Given these challenges with these agencies and the efficiency unit that you have advocated for that should go all over the place, how effectively do you think we can do that to jumpstart the economy in record time? Because, as you said, we really don't have time.
I'm very confident, because the kind of leadership we have in Nigeria today, for me, we've always had issues with leadership, but the kind of leadership we have in Nigeria today speaks to the fact that anytime Mr. President says something, he means it, and then he gives marching orders to his subordinates to make sure that they begin to implement. So I'm very confident that everybody knows that, yes, on one hand, we need these things to work. And then on the other hand, the president have given instructions, and these things must be implemented. So I'm confident. So all I want is that additional push, because I mean, if we don't have feedback system, if you don't give targets, these people just work as if the time is not moving. So if you give them targets, they have deliverables, you will see results, whether they like it or not. And when
just
it begins
one moment,
to affect
Mr. Okuku, just one
their
moment.
income,
Just one moment, Mr. Okuku. Are you saying that they have never been given targets that they should meet in order to be able to work well for the country? Are you saying they never had targets?
see, when we're talking about targets here, what I'm trying to explain here is, if you give someone a target and then there are resultant effects to not delivering on your targets, that's what I'm saying. Because the civil service structure, the way it's structured, you can't really penalize unless the Civil Service Commission comes into the entire plan. So you have to carry the Civil Service Commission along, you carry the head of service along, so that anytime there's going to be sanctions on any officer who refuses to deliver, it becomes, it will propel that efficiency that you're looking for. Because if they have nothing to lose, they really can't do much as far as every human being is concerned.
Well, we're going to take this up when we return from this commercial break that we're about to take, because you've touched on a very, very sore point there, and that is the civil service, which is the engine of any government. We're back in a moment. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. We're still talking about the Nigerian economy in the light of COVID-19, as you can see. And we still have Dr. Obadiah Melafia with us. He's an economist. Thanks for staying with us. You broached something the other time about economy and social progress, but we'll come to that one because it's come to somebody else's attention on Twitter, on our Twitter handle. But that you also heard Mr. Okuku say the other time that there is a need to tinker with the engine of government, which is the civil service, give them targets and all of that to get things done. What's your take on that? How effective do you think that will be in the scheme of things?
No, I think that's extremely important, and it's really one of the missing gaps in our public policy process. I recall that former British Prime Minister Tony Blair was in Nigeria in 2015, shortly after this administration came into power. And he had discussions with them. I was privileged to have dinner with him and his wife, Sherry Blair. And we had extensive discussions on, the idea of a presidential sort of advisory policy group like he had. He called it, the Prime Minister's delivery unit. We need that sort of delivery unit. He tried to sell that intellectual idea, but I didn't think it went very far. What Tony Blair found out that during his first term in office, his first 5 years, things were not moving well. There were no targets for anybody. Nobody was monitoring anything. And so, things really didn't work well. So he was thinking of a legacy. Was anxious to leave a legacy and to be seen to have performed during his time in office. So he set up the Prime Minister's delivery unit in the Prime Minister's office. And it was a very professional group run by professional policy analysts. All ministers and agencies and departments of governments were given quantifiable targets, not just verbosity, but quantifiable targets. And they were not there as an inquisition. They were there actually to help. If any ministry or department had problems meeting their targets, they will sit together and iron out and find out how to support them and help in driving the agenda. And every month, they had to give a comprehensive report to the Prime Minister. And if still in trying to help the department did not succeed, then the minister or whoever was in charge was really fired from their job. So, and it has worked tremendously. during Tony Blair's time, and in fact, he's gone all over the world to preach that, idea of delivery. I think the core word there is delivery, and it should be quantifiable and measurable, and with clear and unambiguous targets. If we can do that, things will work. It will not be sufficient to just go and hide that delivery unit in one department, let's say in planning and budget or something like that. Ministers will read it and say, well, why should I care? They just drop it. But if they're in the presidency with clear targets, and Mr. President gets monthly report, as well as quarterly report and annual report on the core programs of the administration, with rigorous follow-up. And we need a team that will not just become another auditing group that will be going about collecting money from heads of agencies.
Just a quick one, Dr. Welafia. Just a quick one. You said something that's very, very interesting the other time, and that's that unit in the Prime Minister's office in the UK would recommend that the minister be fired if the person, wasn't performing up to par. Let's hypothesize that we do that. Do you see it happening that the minister will be fired for non-performance?
Well, I didn't quite say that, it is the power of that delivery unit to fire a minister. They will simply present the facts to Mr. President that, these targets are way behind and we are slipping on that. And, at that highest level, whoever is the minister, whatever, will have a real dialogue with Mr. President. And failing which, he might, of course, he reserves the final say as to who can be in and who is out. The whole thing is that it makes for more rigorous implementation. It makes everybody sit up. And it makes everybody in every MDA, every ministry, department, and agency of government to sit up to their responsibilities. But it's got to be measurable. Where you can't measure, you can't know whether you're performing or not. So it is a discipline that I think we need to acquire in the public service.
Well, Mr. Okuku, just one more. Let me take this to Mr. Okuku. Well, when he began the talk, Dr. Melafia recommended that the most urgent sector we need to pay attention to is the productive sector. Do you agree with him? If you do, how do you suggest we go about it? We do not have a dearth of policies. It's that implementation that's always been the challenge.
Now, okay, let me put it in a larger, larger spectrum. Now, what are the driving forces that you need to move or industrialize your economy? First things first, you must have a well-structured workforce that is trained. So you have to have your manpower trained. Number two, you have to have your technology, your sector-specific technology structure that is achievable. The ones that you don't have within you can import. Now you have to have your raw material supply strategy, which means there are things that you will need to support the industries within that system that will make it work. Then your project development, and then financial engineering structure, which is exactly what the central bank and other development finance institutions and the commercial banks are trying to push out so that transactions can begin to move. Then the last thing will be access to market. Now, all these things can only work when you have, because they're all laced with a denominator, which I call efficiency. Now, if you cannot train, or retrain your workforce, it will be difficult for anybody to do business because some of them don't even have knowledge of what you want to do. Then if your technology transfer model is not well defined to be sector specific, you will just be running around, and then you will not be able to have targeted technology transfer or develop your own technology hub within your own environment. Then the raw material supply strategy, this is very key here, because as we're industrializing, don't also forget that we're still spending a lot of money importing raw material. I'll give you a very simple example. Every ethanol used in Nigeria is still being imported into this country. It's even as bad as I tell people that Tom Tom or candy is only assembled in Nigeria, not produced in Nigeria. I explain. Because if glucose syrup, the three things that you need to produce a candy is glucose syrup, which is about 80%, flavoring, and then the flavoring, and then the next one is the packaging. If all those things are still gotten from either Brazil or Turkey, you haven't started producing those things here. Glucose syrup comes from cassava. It comes from yam. So our attention to setting that raw material supply strategy would help us in our agri sector, because some of these things come from your input in your agri sector. Okay, let's use cassava for example. Nigeria, we are the largest producer of cassava in the world, but we earn about $2 million from cassava exports. Guess what? The second country is Thailand. They produce about 36 million tons of cassava every year, but they actually earn about $2 billion from the same cassava. What is it that they are doing in Thailand? They are only adding value to the cassava that they have. So these are the things we have to also focus on, talking about the productive sector, because everything must work together to make sure that we are in line with coming out of poverty, because everything must be touched. Because looking at your transport sector, the infrastructure that has to help you move your goods from one point to another, which has to get to the market. So pretty much, I believe there's a lot going on in the country today, because the focus of the government on building, sound infrastructure would also help with central bank, what they are presently doing, trying to support, the agri sector. I was having a conversation some few days ago. I said, do you know that if the president did not insist that we should produce what we eat, during this COVID lockdown, were we going to be waiting for China to open their borders or Thailand to send rice to us? No. But thank God today, we are beginning to produce what we eat. So that's the first step. The second step will now be adding value to the things that we are producing, so that we will now begin to export and then give other countries and earn some income for our nation.
Which also now raises the question of funding, because it's interesting, gentlemen, that both of you haven't really talked about, funding in all of the conversations that you have postulated, all of the ideas that you have brought forward. There is the funding challenge for the budget, and there also is the funding challenge for the private sector. Well, the newspapers are rife this morning with reports that the federal government and states are borrowing more and crowding out the private sector. How should the private sector be approaching this? Because the public sector, the government, can only postulate ideas and policies. They need the partnership of the private sector. How easy is it for the private sector at this time to champion some of these things and ensure that the COVID-19 impact on the economy is not too serious?
I think first things first, there has to be some, deliberate effort towards expanding the economy. Something spoke some few weeks ago, when the federal government had, the bonds. It was oversubscribed by 300%. What does that tell you? It speaks to the fact that the economy is small. It's not as large as, will expect it. So that means there are a lot of free funds waiting for where to go into, secured areas to go into, which also brings me to the most critical issue, which is financial inequality, which exists within this country, which we have to take deliberate steps as policy managers to make sure that we take from the rich and give and create a middle class. So there are strategic ways you can get these things done. I know time will not allow us to, begin to reel out some of these ideas on how these things can work. Apart from taxations, there are things that you can do to make sure that people don't have funds seated in banks. You don't have there's some kind of money that you shouldn't have in the bank. Monies are designed to work. So they do work for you, generate more money, and then, also help other people who are within that space. So until there are those deliberate efforts towards, making, unifying, our economic structure, it will be very difficult. I know, there are certain things the government have been doing towards trying to help, stabilize the economy. We've never had an economy until this time. I always say that because, you can't have the very rich and then have the very poor, and there's no middle class.
I wonder how many people will agree with you that we never had an economy until now. But let me take that to Dr. Melafia. You also heard him say, until now, we didn't have an economy. I don't know what he meant by that, but you may want to take that on, along with the fact that there is a need to partner with the private sector. How do we do that? Because you also referenced the other time that if we do not do some things right, we may be heading towards a recession.
Well, actually, let me confess that, this particular technology didn't even allow me to hear anything Mr. Ogbonna Okuku said. I haven't heard him whatsoever. But from the way his mouth was moving, I concluded he must be saying something intelligent and reasonable.
One of the things that he said, let me, if I can just bring you, one of the things that he said is that we need to create, we need to balance out financial inequality, because there are some people, according to him, there are some money sitting in banks that are not doing anything. Meanwhile, money is designed to work. And then he also talked about the fact that until now, we didn't have an economy, among so many other things. So,
well, I'm an economist, so I'm not sure I understand what he means by that. The economy has always been there, even before Nigeria was created in 1914. There's been an economy. The issue is what sort of economy, what level of performance, that is the issue. But on the private sector, I think we're missing a fundamental point. And that is that in a dynamic and growing economy, the private sector should remain the driver and locomotive of economic transformation and collective prosperity. But if you look at the financials, we are actually far from being where we ought to be. And that has to do a lot with monetary policy. You'll be shocked to know that as we speak today, a lot of banks don't want deposits because the CRR has been increased so high that more than 40% of whatever liquid cash they have is stored and kept in the central bank. I think that's a disaster. God help you the day bankers don't want your money. It's a very bad sign because the intuitive evidence is that of course bankers should always be actively looking for depositors' funds. That is how they can build a pool of funds that they can lend to those who need the money to build their businesses. And the MPR, the monetary policy rate, remains way too high. And it seems to me that we are over-obsessed with maintaining the exchange rate. So we are pouring in so much money just to keep the exchange rate, which in my mind just caters for the needs of the urban elite while neglecting rural agriculture. I'm a farm boy from a small missionary village, and so agriculture is very close to my heart, and I think that we're doing a great disservice by keeping those financial aggregates the way we are keeping them. It is very disastrous for the economy, and there's also the crowding out effect. Trillions of intervention funds have been structured by the CBN, and the CBN is literally taking over the role of being the lender. Of course, it is the lender of last resort, but it should leave the basic operational activities of lending to the commercial banks. And I would really advocate that a lot of the intervention funds should be channeled mostly through the commercial banks. and talk to anybody in the streets. And a lot of people have approached me, please, how do I, access these intervention funds? There's a situation where the people involved become gatekeepers and rent collectors before you even sign a form and they're asking for 10,000 and things like that. I think it is disgraceful. Okay. I think it is wrong. We must create a vibrant environment in which business can thrive and flourish.
Okay.
Because
let me. That's a very, very fine, point that you have just mentioned now, because it also reminds me of the fact that there is the formal sector in the private sector, and there is the informal, sector, which some people call the unorganized or artisanal businessmen. Let me take this to Mr. Okuku, to give us his final comments on that. So the informal sector remains the largest, in the entire spectrum of the Nigerian economy, federal or state. What do we need to do to jumpstart that sector so that they can also hold their ace, in the scheme of things?
See, you can't grow an economy in isolation, really, because whether we like it or not, the informal sector, first of all, you have to have a database. You have to even know who they are, because yes, they exist, but I mean, there has to be, a database. Then you now do your proper indexing, know those who need, to acquire more knowledge.
Essentially, sorry, I'm sorry.
Begin to plan for each and every one of them.
Pardon me, Mr.
Okuku. With their concerns.
We could go on and on, but I've completely lost track of time. But I really have to thank you. I believe we'll have to do this again if we're going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the economy. It must be an ongoing conversation. But I have to thank you very much for being a part of this conversation this morning. Ogbonna Okuku is a business and investment consultant. We've also spoken with Dr. Obadiah Milafia, who is an economist. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time this morning. So we're back in a moment to take on your contribution to the program. Please stay with us.